Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Pakistan has once again rejected in New Delhi's claims that Kashmir is India's integral part, saying the state is an internationally recognized disputed territory. Rebutting New Delhi's response to Prime Minister Imran Khan's speech at the UN General Assembly, Pakistan's representative Zulkarnain China said Kashmir is not a part of India. It never was and never will be. China said India's accusations on Islamabad of promoting terrorism are a shameful attempt to deflect the world's attention from the real issues. The All-Party Hurriyat Conference has held a demonstration outside the Indian High Commission in Islamabad. The protest against Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi comes hours before his address to the UN General Assembly. In their speeches, Hurriyat leaders said the Indian government is pursuing a policy of genocide of Kashmiris in the occupied valley. US Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad says the Taliban will not accept a ceasefire until an agreement with the Afghan government is sealed. In an interview, he said the US wants the Afghan war to end as soon as possible, but there is no deadline for the negotiations to succeed. Earlier, Iran's ambassador to Kabul, Bahadur Aminian, said the talks without foreign interference are the only way to bring peace to Afghanistan. "25 people have been killed and 2 others critically injured in a military plane crash in northeastern Ukraine. The Interior Ministry said the aircraft crashed while landing during a training exercise. It said 20 Air Force University cadets and 7 crew members were among the 27 people on board. India's COVID-19 cases have crossed 5.9 million with a spike of over 85,000 infections and 1,089 deaths in the last 24 hours. The number of coronavirus cases in France has passed 500,000 after recording nearly 150,000 infections in the past 2 days. In Pakistan, 7 people have died overnight, taking the toll to 6,451 with more than 309,000 cases. The pandemic has infected over 32 million worldwide and claimed more than 987,000 lives. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan has once again rejected New Delhi's claim that Kashmir is India's integral part, saying the state is an internationally recognized disputed territory. Rebutting New Delhi's response to Prime Minister Imran Khan's speech at the UN General Assembly, Pakistan's representative Zulkarnain China said India can only claim to be a military occupier of the valley. China said India's accusations on Islamabad of promoting terrorism are a shameful attempt to deflect the world's attention from the real issues. China termed India as mothership of terrorism, saying New Delhi uses it against each of its neighbors, its own people, and the Kashmiris. The Pakistani side said India should put its own house in order, strive for regional peace based on equality and mutual respect to settle the disputes. Earlier, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan called on the world to probe crimes against humanity in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. In a video address to the UN General Assembly, Khan said the global body must ensure that Kashmiris get their right to self-determination. This report has more.
Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan highlighted the core issues of the region while addressing the 75th UN General Assembly session. Khan said India is being ruled by an extremist ideology which believes in the ethnic cleansing of minorities, especially Muslims. He said the Kashmir dispute has been rightly described as a nuclear flashpoint, adding that India has put a legislation in place to alter the demographics of the occupied valley. The Premier said this is a war crime under the 4th Geneva Convention.
Despite constant Indian provocations and ceasefire violations along the line of control and the working boundary, targeting innocent civilians, Pakistan has exercised maximum restraint. We have consistently sensitized the world community about a false flag operation and another ill-conceived misadventure by India. I want to make it clear that any attempt by the fascist, totalitarian, RSS-led Indian government to aggress against Pakistan will be met by a nation that will fight for its freedom to the end.
Referring to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the Prime Minister called for a two-state solution in line with UN resolutions. The Prime Minister said Pakistan played a vital role in Afghan peace process and expressed full support for ongoing talks in Doha.
Pakistan fully facilitated the process that culminated in the US-Taliban peace agreement on 29 February 2020. Pakistan is deeply gratified that it has fulfilled its part of the responsibility. The Afghan leaders must now seize this historic opportunity to achieve reconciliation.
He said the coronavirus pandemic was an opportunity to bring humanity together, but it has instead fanned nationalism and given rise to racial and religious hatred and violence against vulnerable minorities in several places.
The one country in the world today where I'm sad to say the state sponsors Islamophobia, and that is India. The reason behind this is the RSS ideology that unfortunately rules India today. This extremist ideology was founded in the 1920s. The RSS founding fathers were inspired by the Nazis, and they adopted their concepts of racial purity and supremacy. While the Nazis' hate was directed at the Jews, the RSS directs it towards the Muslims and to a lesser extent, the Christians.
Prime Minister also urged the implementation of the Paris Accord to curb climate change. He said the UN should be made fully responsive to the challenges of contemporary times.
And for more on this, we are joined by Munir Akram, Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations. Thank you very much for your time. Prime Minister Imran Khan last year raised the Kashmir issue at the UN General Assembly, which echoed internationally. Khan again highlighted the dispute at the UN forum. How much it will pressurize New Delhi?
I think that it is a major projection and emphasis on the Kashmir issue, which the Prime Minister has once again brought before the General Assembly. It is obvious that capitals around the world will have to take notice of the points that have been put forward by the Prime Minister, the human rights violations in Kashmir, the violations of ceasefire along the line of control targeting civilians, and the need to find a solution to this problem, which is a major issue between two nuclear armed states and therefore poses a threat to international peace and security. Governments would be negligent if they did not pay attention to the Prime Minister's assertions and assumptions which he put forward at the General Assembly.
Mr. Akram, Prime Minister Imran Khan warned against any misadventure by India in Azad Kashmir through a false flag operation. What's your take on this?
We've always warned the world that India in the past has mounted several false flag operations, terrorist incidents, in order to frame Pakistan and create a cause or justification for aggression against Pakistan. This goes back to even the 1970s. This is the Indian modus vivendi of how they operate. So it is important for us to warn the world that they could resort to this sort of false flag operation once again in order to find justification to aggress against Pakistan. Modi is under pressure internally. COVID crisis, economic downturn, Kashmir, Ladakh, all of these are mounting pressure points domestically on Modi, and therefore we are concerned that they could resort to a diversionary move against Pakistan, and we have to warn the world against the aggressive posture and intentions of the Indian government.
Mr. Akram, Prime Minister Imran Khan said Pakistan supports an Afghan-led peace process. How do you see Islamabad's efforts in the ongoing intra-Afghan talks and India's role as a peace spoiler?
I think we have fulfilled our promises and our obligations to promote peace. Pakistan will be the biggest beneficiary of peace, apart from the people of Afghanistan. We will be able to have the end of terrorism from Afghanistan. We will be able to return the refugees, and we will have the ability to connect with Central Asia through Afghanistan. And these are major benefits that we could derive. So we will try and be helpful. But finally, ultimately, it is the responsibility of the leaders of Afghanistan and the people of Afghanistan to find reconciliation amongst themselves. And this is their responsibility. We will help them. We can't do it for them.
Munir Akram, Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations. Thanks for talking to Indus News. And now moving on, Pakistan has strongly condemned the murder of prominent Kashmiri lawyer and activist Babar Qadri in Srinagar. In a statement, the Foreign Office said another voice critical of Indian atrocities in occupied Kashmir has been silenced through extrajudicial killing. Qadri was shot on Thursday evening at his home in Srinagar by unidentified gunmen posing as clients. He was rushed to a hospital where the doctors declared him dead. Qadri was an outspoken debater on Indian television where he would defend Kashmiri's right to self-determination. Pakistan has called for an international probe into the unabated killings of Kashmiris in the occupied valley. Indian media has revealed the involvement of Indian entities in money laundering, terrorism, drug dealing and financial frauds around the world. This was exposed in the US financial watchdog Financial Crimes Enforcement Network's leaked reports. More details in this report. Now moving on, 25 people have been killed and 2 others critically injured in a military plane crash in northeastern Ukraine. The Interior Ministry said the aircraft crashed while landing during a training exercise. It said 20 Air Force University cadets and 7 crew members were among the 27 people on board. In a statement, the State Emergency Service of the Ukraine said crash happened around 2 kilometers from a military airport. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Indian media has revealed the involvement of Indian entities in money laundering, terrorism, drug dealing and financial frauds around the world. This was exposed in the US financial watchdog Financial Crimes Enforcement Network's leaked reports. Details in this report.
Indian media, along with 109 media organizations in 88 countries, teamed up with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists to trace the Indian individuals and companies named in the 3,201 suspicious activity reports filed with FinCEN between 1999 and 2017. The investigation of these reports has revealed transactions of entities including Global Diamond Firm owned by Indians and a sponsor of the Indian Premier League team. In a majority of cases, domestic branches of 44 Indian banks have been utilized to receive or remit the funds to foreign banks. There are a total of 3,201 transactions worth $1.53 billion which have been listed as suspicious. These cases are also being investigated by the Central Bureau of Investigation, the Enforcement Directorate and the Directorate of Revenue Intelligence. The investigative team says the reporting has exposed how banks and regulators have failed the public by allowing the flow of dirty money to go unchecked. The U.S. Department of Justice has already launched investigations. Earlier, FinCEN in a statement said that the unauthorized disclosure of SARS is a crime that can impact the national security of the U.S. Responding to this, ICIJ said the reporting for the FinCEN files is lawful and appropriate.
U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad says the Taliban will not accept a ceasefire until an agreement with the Afghan government is sealed. This comes as violence has spiked across the country since direct talks between the two warring sides started in Doha earlier this month. In an interview, he said the launch of the intra-Afghan talks is an extraordinary development in contemporary Afghan history. He said the U.S. wants the Afghan war to end as soon as possible, but there is no deadline for the negotiations to succeed. Khalilzad also said the U.S. will take necessary measures to protect itself from potential terrorist threats from Afghanistan. Earlier, Iran's ambassador to Kabul, Bahadur Aminian, said the negotiations without foreign interference are the only way to bring peace to Afghanistan. He said Tehran is fully committed to support and facilitate the ongoing Afghan peace process. 25 people have been killed and 2 others critically injured in a military plane crash in northeastern Ukraine. The Interior Ministry said the aircraft crashed while landing during a training exercise. It said 20 Air Force University cadets and 7 crew members were among the 27 people on board. In a statement, the State Emergency Service of Ukraine said the crash happened around 2 kilometers from the military airport. Kharkiv city's governor said one pilot reported failure in the left engine of the plane as some of the people managed to jump at a lower altitude.
We were driving to Shahuiv and a plane fell right before us. We don't know why. A burning man ran outside. A car drove to the place. They took out a fire extinguisher and started putting out fire. Then there came another one. He had his head cut. He was pulled to that side. They put out the fire on the one that was burning.
President Volodymyr Zelensky's office said he will visit the crash site while also announcing an investigation into the disaster. Now moving on, Lebanon's Prime Minister designate has resigned after failing to form a non-partisan government. Mustafa Adib announced his resignation after his meeting with Lebanon's President Michel Aoun. The outgoing Prime Minister was chosen on August the 31st to form a cabinet amid the country's worst political and economic crisis in recent times. Mustafa Adib tried to form a government in a political landscape dominated by sectarian divide and power-sharing model between Muslims and Christians. Key cabinet appointments have reportedly become the bone of contention in the negotiations amid stalled talks with the International Monetary Fund over a vital bailout. At least 7 Palestinians have been injured after Israeli forces used rubber bullets on protesters in occupied West Bank. The protesters were demonstrating against settlements building in the occupied territory. A journalist covering the demonstrations was also hit by the rubber bullets fired by the Israeli forces. The demonstrators held protests in the town of Kafar Kadum, north of the West Bank. Israel occupied Jerusalem and the West Bank following the 1967 Six-Day War and began establishing settlements in the area. Russia says it backs Palestine's right to self-determination within the framework of the international law. This comes after Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister, Mikhail Bogdanov, held talks with the representatives of Palestine's Fatah and Hamas groups. Russia's foreign ministry said Moscow is ready to help restore Palestinian unity on the platform of the Palestine Liberation Organization. It said Bogdanov discussed the results of Istanbul summit between the two groups to bridge intra-Palestinian rift. The ministry said Bogdanov extended Moscow's firm support to all Palestinian parties in the interests of the Palestinian people. Earlier, Fatah and Hamas met in Istanbul and agreed on holding elections in Palestine for the first time in 15 years to overcome their differences. Russia says the U.S. presence in war-torn Syria is illegal. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Vereshnin said Washington's presence in Syria's Al Jazeera and the Al Tanaf region is unlawful. In an interview, Vereshnin said the continued plunder of the Syrian national wealth, such as oil, was totally unacceptable. He said despite differences over several issues, Moscow is in contact with Washington in Syria through military diplomatic channels. Earlier, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his Iranian counterpart Mohammad Javad Zarif said any foreign presence in Syria without the country's consent violates international law. Lavrov said the presence of foreign troops in Syria is in breach of the UN Security Council Resolution number 2254. Russia says it intercepted two U.S. bombers approaching its airspace over the Baltic Sea. Russia's National Defense Management Center said the Sukhoi Tu-7 fighters from the country's Baltic fleet cut off the targets. The center said the jets approached the U.S. Air Force B-52H bombers at a safe distance. It said the entire flights of the Russian fighters proceeded in strict compliance with the international rules of using the airspace. The center said the Russian pilots did not let the intruding aircraft to violate the Russian borders. Meanwhile, Russia's military chief, Valery Gerasimov, said the US and NATO are conducting military drills close to the Russian border. Russian President Vladimir Putin has observed the Kavkaz 2020 military drills taking place in the southern Astrakhan region. In a statement, the Defense Ministry said the drills focus on combating cruise missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles. It said the exercises involve around 1,000 military personnel from Armenia, Belarus, China, Myanmar, and Pakistan. The exercises will be observed by representatives from Azerbaijan, Indonesia, Iran, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and Sri Lanka. The ministry said the drills will involve around 80,000 personnel, including Russian missile defense and Navy units. It said the drills will also feature up to 250 tanks, 450 military personnel carriers, and 200 artillery systems. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. India's COVID-19 cases have crossed 5.9 million with a spike of over 85,000 infections and 1,089 deaths in the last 24 hours. The number of coronavirus cases in France has passed 500,000 after recording nearly 150,000 infections in the past 2 days. The pandemic has infected over 32 million worldwide and claimed more than 987,000 lives. More in this report.
Around the world, stricter social distancing guidelines and restrictions on businesses are being brought into effect to curb a second spike. But in contrast, curbs on businesses are being lifted in some US states, despite the increasing number of cases nationwide. The World Health Organization has warned that the global COVID-19 death toll can hit 2 million before an effective vaccine is widely used. The health body said the figure can be higher without concerted international action.
As far as we're concerned, and so far, as you know, all the publications we have seen, the publications say it's actually something, the virus has happened naturally. It came naturally. So these are all the publications we know.
In Spain, the government has recommended reimposing a partial lockdown on all of Madrid area, where cases have risen sharply. More restrictions have been announced in several regions of the UK as new daily infections continue to rise. Meanwhile, Australia says it has been able to restore about half the jobs it lost during the economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Speaking remotely from Sydney, Prime Minister Scott Morrison said Australia has fared better than most in terms of the death toll.
Our COVID-19 case and fatality rates are a fraction of those across the globe. And while our economy has not been spared the blow of recession, our first in almost 30 years in Australia, the impact has been far less than almost every other developed economy in the world. Almost half the jobs that we had lost to the virus early on have been already recovered.
South Korea's new cases fell below 100 for the first time in 4 days as the country is struggling with sporadic cluster infections in the Greater Seoul area. Mainland China reported 50 new COVID-19 cases compared with 8 cases announced a day earlier.
In Pakistan, 7 people have died overnight due to the COVID-19, taking the toll to 6,451. The Health Ministry reported 566 new infections since yesterday, raising the number of active cases to nearly 8,000. The ministry said with a 95% recovery rate, over 295,000 patients have recovered from the disease. Sindh is still the most hit province with more than 135,000 infections, while over 98,000 cases have been reported in Punjab province so far. The National Command and Operations Centre says 735 hospitals are providing facilities to 874 patients admitted across the country. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.